Here, I'm Stephen Overley. I host the Politico Tech podcast. I think this will be a very interesting and very timely conversation about artificial intelligence and other technologies in our elections. You may have heard there's an election coming up in just a few days, and so a lot to dig into, and excited to be joined by FEC Commissioner Shauna Bouchard. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Is the mic? I think it's working. When you said timely, I was about to say, wait, timely meaning the sense of like 6 days from today. So yes, we are in probably the time of times, as they would say.
Yes, and the definition of crunch time, I think. Let's start with one question that I know has been before the FEC this election cycle, and that has to do with concerns about AI-generated deepfakes in political ads. We've seen a few instances of this campaign cycle, and last month, you and your colleagues sort of put out a decision saying that existing regulations kind of cover AI. Can you walk me through the rationale behind that decision?
Sure. A petition was filed by a nonprofit group that essentially wanted the commission to take the regulations or the statute for fraudulent misrepresentation and to change it to say that it applied to deceptively fake communications or political advertising. There were thousands of comments, and I would say that it was a robust yes would be the answer that people wanted. But what we did is we decided on a notice of disposition where we did not move forward with the rulemaking because the way that we interpreted the statute and the regulation is that it was technology neutral. Essentially, these communications would already be covered under the existing state of the law. I voted and worked along with my colleagues to craft the draft interpretive rule that made this conclusion. But I would say is that I think that the greatest discovery that we made out of this is that people are really looking for disclaimers or something that gives information, in fact, that this is an AI-generated communication. So we weren't able to successfully come to a conclusion of what the petitioners wanted, but I think it's important to note this is technology neutral. We do have to balance the First Amendment rights that we're dealing with individuals when you're dealing with political communications. And I am excited when I look at what's before Congress for some of the disclaimer things that really hit to the core of what we need.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Do you feel like you sort of hit the limits of what the FEC has the authority to do, and what would you like to see Congress do on this issue?
The quick answer is going to be yes. I think that we did our best to be able to say these communications are covered. But what I think, even from the standpoint of what the petitioners really want and what the public really wants, is knowledge. And in the sense of, could we require that they include a disclaimer on these types of communications? At this stage, no. But I do see promising things before Congress, not to get you all into like the exciting weeds of legislation, but Senator Klobuchar has had a bill out there that has been working on disclaimers, which I think is what people really want. Congresswoman Clark has been like a leader in this field and has been working on things like this, the real political ads, since 2023. These are the tools that I think are really needed to be able to be effective so that we can know, so the public will know that something is AI generated.
Right. I think those rules were not put in place, obviously, by Congress before the election. There's some hope, perhaps after the election, some legislation may come out. The states, though, there has been action, right? I think over 20 states now have some sort of disclosure requirements around AI-generated content or manipulated content in political ads. Are there states or a state that you're kind of watching this election cycle that could potentially be a national model?
I'm going to say 2 states. I think you can look at, well, let me say this. Of the 20 plus states that have been working to move this ball forward, and the states really have taken the lead of this, and I'm excited to see that. And I think they'll become test cases that we're going to look at for congressional action for federal regulations that we could put in place. States have taken the perspective of, do we treat this as criminal activity or civil activity? And that's where out of those 24 states, you're going to see the split that's coming down. For example, Minnesota has a ban. It is criminal activity that if you do something that's not necessarily named as AI, but deceptive, and deceptive in the sense that it has an individual acting in a way they did not act, you can have criminal liability for that. And it sets a time period, I believe, 90 days prior to the election. Texas gets it down to 30, which is like Texas. We're going to make it even tighter. But other states, like you have an Indiana example, where they require that there be a disclaimer. And if there is not, it creates a private right of action. And I think those two states are going to be the ones that we look at afterwards to see what the deal is. There is an actual case that people might want to watch out for in Indiana, because
Okay.
you do have an instance, a senator who's running for the governor's election had $1 million ad buy that has a distorted photo inside of his ad, and it's within the time period and did not include a disclaimer. So that's something interesting that you might want to watch, because there's a private right of action there, and we'll see what happens. And I think that one has made a lot of headway, because this is a United States senator. I think they might be aware of the rules a little bit more than maybe the common person.
Right. No, I think the Indiana example is sort of going to be a test case in many ways for the enforceability of these laws. You know, I was talking with a researcher recently who had done a study on the effectiveness of disclaimers in AI content. And about a third of participants in that study didn't notice the disclaimer on the ad. And so it sort of left me with this question of, are disclaimers enough? I mean, is that enough transparency? Does that provide enough information, do you think, for the public?
Well, as working in the government, I'm going to say yes and no, because that, exactly. But I give you yes or no. If you're looking for a disclaimer, they are there. If you are aware that disclaimers exist, they are there and you will look for them. But I think that the real need is not just disclaimers, but human intervention. We, as the individuals, are the first wall of defense. And this is why I think in those regards, you've got to educate individuals, continue to put out things that make them aware of when content might be manipulated. So I am a big proponent of disclaimers. If it's just me answering the question, that's what you would be seeing on all of these things. And I'm always appreciative when you have political entities that have taken the step of their own. And that's going to let me give you a walk back in the history of AI political ads, is when Biden announced his candidacy, that he was going to be running again. Anyone remember when the RNC put out their AI generated ad? I don't know if there's any kind of political advertising geeks in this room, but I'm the one for you. And the RNC put out a dystopian ad, but I don't have a problem with their ad, because their ad said artificially generated. And that's all that I'm seeking in this. I do not want to infringe upon anyone's First Amendment rights to say what they want to say, but I want to protect the disclosure regime that the Supreme Court has said is permissible. And I think that's the way that it's done. They said AI generated. You can take the communication for what it's worth and decide on how you want to process that information.
You know, I interview people who are sort of all along the spectrum of how worried they are just personally about AI in political context, right? Folks who think it's overblown and exaggerated, and folks who think, you know, the truth and democracy are in true peril, right? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I think it's a great tool. We've seen how AI has been used for smaller campaigns that don't have the big funds that larger campaigns do, and this can be used to automate some of the things that people take for granted. I think that it's being developed into a way that we're going to see the true benefits of AI after this election cycle. Have we had instances where you've had the deep fakes, and we can name those. You know, you had the robocall in New Hampshire. I might be getting my states wrong, but in New Hampshire with Biden during the primary, that was telling Democrats don't vote. You had Elon Musk. I was about to say Twitter, but I'm supposed to say X, but I just like to say Twitter. On an X with the Harris kind of clone saying things that she never said. We even have the AI for former President Trump when Taylor Swift. We had the ICU, like the good vote, I'm voting for the former president, which then had the pop star coming out and saying, hey, it wasn't me. So those are examples but I don't think it's turned out to be as bad as people are thinking. But we were talking in the green room about this, is that I don't think you're going to really see the results of deep fakes until after this election.
Right.
Because if I were going to be one putting out one, I wouldn't be doing it until a week before the election or 2 weeks before the election, so I can actually have an effect on the electorate. Putting it out months in advance gives the opportunity for someone to correct it. And I'll give you an example of where an effective deep fake had a result. If anyone is familiar with the mayoral election in Chicago, or a year or so ago, this audio communication was a deep fake that was put out, days before the election or the primary election. And it had a candidate who was a former police officer allegedly making statements that, that were deplorable. And in essence, it had an impact because it was put out so late in the game.
Right. I mean, we're very much in crunch time for disinformation, both pre and post-election. I want to pivot slightly from AI because, last year, some new rules went into effect around digital advertising, which is obviously where millions, if not billions of dollars, right, get spent nowadays in election cycles. I'm curious how effective those new rules have been in terms of their implementation. And then are there gaps still that you think need to be filled when it comes to digital advertising in politics?
Thank you. In 22, the commission was able to resolve the internet disclaimer rulemaking that was 10 years in the making. And so we were able to move that. And then in 23, we expanded upon the definition of a public communication, essentially to basically say that communications that were paid or promoted to be on the internet were also covered by our regulations. But where we were not able to go to further, and I think we should have, and I would gladly have supported it, but when you're dealing in federal law, it's called compromise. Nobody likes it, but this is what you have to do. We were not able to include rules that talked about social media influencers. So you have to disclose that you paid them, but they don't have to necessarily disclose if they're sharing a communication as a result of it. And I think that there's been a big miss in this area because what this election, let me take it back. In 2008, it was about emails. In 2012 or 14, well, 2010, 12, it was text messages.
Right.
And then in 2016, we discovered, social media. But what we're discovering now is social media influencers have a real impact or potential impact on the electorate, and people don't know that they're being paid to do this. Like, I had a group coming from a university, and I was speaking to them, and I was explaining this to them. And I asked them, and I'm going to put it in kind of tweenish, if someone was telling you to go buy this makeup or these clothes, would you like to know if they told you, if they were paid to tell you this?
Right.
And they were all like, yeah. I said, okay, so would you not also like to know that someone is putting an ad out to say support Shauna Broussard for whatever she's running for, and someone else paid them to do it? And they were like, yes. I said, so that's the essence of what we were not able to accomplish. You have social media influencers that are being paid $200, but some are being paid $15,000 to go create content in support of the various candidates, and you won't know about it. You just won't.
Right. Well, from a journalist perspective, I'll say that line is increasingly blurred, right, between media and promotion. And so it's a fascinating space where I think more transparency might be needed. As we wrap up the conversation, I do want to ask you, because it feels like it's the elephant in the room this election cycle, and that is Elon Musk. Whether it is his lottery for registered voters or his PAC contributions, is this something that is in the FEC purview that you're watching? And even if not, I mean, what do you make of the impact that that is having on money in our politics?
It's an interesting question, and I will have to do the pivot and dance because I couldn't say if there was anything before us. But as a individual speaker, I don't think it passes the smell test. Like, I'm asking you, like, someone shake your head yes or no if you think it passes the test. Like, thank you. There's someone there. Like, I don't think this passes the smell test for me. But remember, the FEC is not about your actual placing your ballot. This agency deals with the money that's spent for communications, for election, for contributions. So, in the sense of if there's any communications that Musk has to report, that is something that I would deal with. If in the sense of if he's paying someone to engage in actual voting, you are dealing with criminal liability, and DOJ would be dealing with that. And as you can see, but I will say that there was a lot of news about that, and the spending stopped. So maybe the smell test works, folks. Maybe.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I just want to end on one very quick note, which is you mentioned, the FEC deciding on digital rules. That was a 10-year-long process, right? And I don't need to tell you that there are questions about the productivity and effectiveness of the FEC and reaching compromise. Is it inevitable that technology will always sort of outpace our ability to regulate its uses in elections, or is there a way for the agency to try to keep pace with, the innovation in this space?
I'm going to say it's inevitable. But that doesn't mean that I'm unhopeful. Not at all. It's inevitable because, one, technology, as I just said, from 2008 to now, how we've developed in political advertising and how everything is sped up. It took us 10 years to be able to get the rules for internet disclaimers. It's been 2006 since this technology for the internet and social media and everything have been available, and we took a long time to get there. So I do think that it's going to develop a lot faster before the rules can change. I am grateful that our statute and our regulations are technology neutral. And so the fact that it has that neutrality does give us the ability to say, hey, it's still covered. We don't have to create specific rules. But I have to say, I can only promulgate regulations based upon the statutes that Congress produces.
Right.
And if they do that, then I can act. So I'm consistently going to be here, and you can check what I've said before, is like, Congress, please go past those. As soon as you pass any of this AI disclaimer things, I will be the first one in line trying to push those forward.
Well, Commissioner, appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.